applications these days aren't built completely from scratch. Instead, developer teams will use components that are already pre-packaged and then use those components within the web application, such as a component that might talk to a back-end database, instead of writing all the code from scratch that does that. But the problem with this item A9, using components with known vulnerabilities, is a lack of knowledge on the part of the development teams that are using these components. It's crucial that they understand exactly how those components are coded and also how they interact within the web application, and also whether there are any updates for those components. So we have to think about inventorying the components that are in use by a web application by tracking the name of the component, the versions of the components, which is crucial because any listed vulnerabilities will have a version string along with the component. And then, of course, the interaction of that component with our application, whether it interacts with other hosts, whether it interacts with a back-end database, and so on. Developers must always be aware of components that are no longer supported, because if it's no longer supported, that means if a vulnerability pops up related to that component, there will be no updates made available. Also, when we introduce a changed component in an application, maybe a new version of it, or even initially we introduce the component into the application, it's important that regression testing take place to ensure that the introduction of this change hasn't caused other aspects of the application which worked previously to all of a sudden not work correctly. Pictured on the screen, we see an example from the National Vulnerability Database. This is on the NIST.gov website. This one is specifically related to the Oracle Health Sciences Data Management Workbench component. Now, that would mean we'd have to know if our application is using this. And we can even see the version that is affected, in this case 2.4.8. So it's an easily exploitable vulnerability. So the other thing to think about is who is tracking what is being used in our applications, who is going out and checking to see if there are known vulnerabilities and if there are any updates. It needs to be a part of the organization's security program as related to web application security. Here's another example on the same website. It's related to Apache Struts. Now, Apache Struts is yet another component that can be used by Apache web servers that can include things like malicious users being able to include a malicious payload and run it on the web server, which can also include sensitive data disclosure. So again, someone needs to be tracking which components are being used, whether there are vulnerabilities, and of course, whether or not there are updates to address those vulnerabilities. The other thing is that there are plenty of tools out there that can query a web application seeking any outdated components.